And I got to tell you that I don't think at any point in the history of mankind has this topic been so important. My guests today are Dr. Harville Hendrix and Dr. Helen Hunt. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. We're happy to be here.
Thank you.
And you're with an amazing nonprofit called Relationships First. I'll start with you, Harville. How did this all start?
Relationships First. Well, Helen and I, about 10 years ago, had a kind of breakthrough that in couples therapy, we were not able to actually achieve a social mission. But we thought that the thing that works in the clinic could work in the culture. So we called together our colleagues, our peers from around the country who are in the relationship business and couple business and neuroscience business. And we had a 4-year conversation about how could we bring together all of our talents, content, and visibility to make an impact or to contribute to the culture, what we now know to be how relationships work. So that led, long story but short thing, that led to the idea that we should become a not-for-profit. We had Alanis Morissette was a part of that group. She helped name it Relationships First instead of, we formerly had the Relationship Council, which made it a kind of, we're the council. Instead, we decided to make it a value system, Relationships First. So that was the organization, and that group of people sort of bequeathed that to us to do an experiment in Dallas through that not-for-profit called Safe Conversations.
And let's bring you in, Helen, because you guys often say that talking is the most dangerous thing people do. Explain that.
Well, I will explain it mentioning what you just said 3 minutes ago. You introduced this show saying, never have relationships been so important. I was very moved when you said that because, we may be getting along with people close to us, but we look at the news and it's just pretty bad. And never, and my response is never before in the history of the world has there been a relational science that helps people shift from conflict to connection, that solves relationship problems. You can hope to be in good relationship. You can pledge your love at the altar. You can pledge love with your family or at work, but someone bugs you and you lose it. So talking is, I love this phrase of Harville's, talking is the most dangerous thing. People, you don't even know you're upsetting someone and suddenly someone's upset.
And what I love is that you've brought this to the public, and you've held a number of workshops. One of them we attended, and we have some video of that. So we're going to roll the video and allow you, Harville, to kind of describe what we're watching. So this was a workshop that you guys held on, I believe it was a Valentine's weekend a few years ago in South Dallas. We can see people walking in.
Oh, yeah, they're showing up.
Tell us what happens at the workshops.
Well, the workshops, and that particular workshop is attended by couples. It's called a Safe Conversations workshop. So you can see that people gather and we are on the stage, and what we do is we give them some ideas about what relationships is, how they work, what marriage is, how it works. Then we teach them an exercise called Safe Conversations, which is a 3-step dialogical process, and they practice that, and then afterwards they are to hug each other. You can see them hugging after an exercise, and you also saw them sort of walking in circles around each other. That's called a flooding exercise. So there's a sort of a dialogical face-to-face talking, and then other kinds of input in which couples begin to move through, as Helen said earlier, from the conflict they brought into the room. They learn the technology of safe conversations, which helps them be able to connect beyond their differences.
And it's
And
emotional, isn't it?
Here's the hugging after the dialogue is over. We ask people to hug because we've discovered that connecting can't just happen with words. It needs eye contact, it needs words, but the most powerful experience of connecting is physiological. So we want people to hug because they then have a transmission of neurochemistry that bonds them in a way that just talking doesn't.
And Helen, let's bring you back into this. I know one of the most important things is picking the right time. So one of the things that happens with me and my wife is, and I love her dearly, but it'll be late at night and we're about to go to sleep and she'll say, hey, we need to talk about something. And it's a very heavy topic that I just don't have the energy for.
Right.
And sometimes I end up saying something that I would never say if I was wide awake and cheery. So Helen, let's talk about how important it is to set an appointment.
Yes, you just said it. It's very important to set an appointment, and that sounds sort of structured, but your partner respects, even if it's something positive. But Jeff, I just want to say I have a lot of empathy for your wife. I used to do that to Harville. Phone doesn't ring, kids were asleep, I had his undivided attention, and that's when I used to tell Harville what he did wrong that day.
Yeah.
And he was so miserable in our relationship. At this point, we bound another time to have discussions, but every night before going to bed, we give three appreciations to each other.
Yeah, so
I have a happier husband as a result.
Absolutely.
And
so you come to bed with a problem, and in bed you get a second problem,
Yes.
which is I'm not dealing with the problem you brought to bed. So we need to, it's called boundary setting, that you have to, that most of the problems couples have are violating each other's boundaries.
Yes.
Yeah.
Could you take us through an exercise? I think it would help if the audience were to watch you demonstrate it. Could you take us through an exercise of what that would look like? What does a safe conversation look like?
Oh, sure. So it's now a good time to talk about what a safe conversation looks like.
Yeah, now's a good time. And if it's not a good time, I could say, listen, I'm doing an interview. How about like 20 minutes? And would that be okay with
Right.
you? And
Yes.
because you don't have to say yes, he's asking if I'm available.
And if you don't say yes, you need to say when, because the brain needs some predictability that if you say no now, when will you say yes? And that really is a human phenomenon, which we really discovered in children. If a child asks for something and the parent has to say no, they need to say when. And then the child isn't anxious. But if you say no and don't say when, then the child's going to ask again.
So
or
I'm
go away.
available.
So you're
Would
available.
You like to say anything about safe conversations?
Oh, well, yes. I'd like to talk about what I think safe conversation is.
Okay. So what I'm hearing you say is you'd like right now to talk about what safe conversations is.
Yeah. Thank you for mirroring that back.
Did I get that?
Yes.
Okay.
you did.
And is there more about that?
Well, the more about it is that safe conversations is a way of talking that creates safety, so people can connect beyond their differences.
So safe conversations is a way to talk that creates safety, so even if two people have differences, they can still be connected, even if they have differences. Did I get that?
Yeah, you added a little bit to it, but it was still accurate, that it fundamentally is about connecting beyond difference, which is, we think, the biggest problem people have is difference. You have a point of view, I have a point of view, you're right, I'm right, we can't both be right, but we both are right, but we want to go into conflict about that.
Which, as you've thought about this, the biggest problem people have is someone feels differently. It's difference. Difference is the human problem.
Yeah, difference is
Accepting
behind,
difference.
difference is behind all conflict. Yeah.
Difference is behind all conflict.
And safe conversation helps people connect around their differences without polarizing.
So safe conversation helps connect around differences without polarizing?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Harville, that makes sense. I think that's a reason to keep thinking about and growing safe conversations, it makes sense that you want to share this technology with others.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine that you'd feel more hope for the world if people were using safe conversations like in people's houses and in the White House and the houses of Congress and everywhere.
Well, so thanks for validating my point of view, and yes, those are my feelings.
That was beautiful. That was a beautiful exercise, and just for the viewer, if you were watching, there's a lot of active listening. He's expressing something. You're repeating back to him what you thought you heard him say. If you misstated it, you get a chance to get it right.
Yeah.
That's powerful, and it transcends marriages and couples. So this could be a boss and an employee. It could be a police officer and somebody they're pulling over.
Yes, exactly. The Mura back, we now know scientifically regulates the reactivity of the brain. There's a sort of a danger sensor in the brain called the amygdala. And if you mirror back a fear or a statement, that part of the brain settles down. But if you polarize with it or say that's wrong, that part of the brain escalates, and that's what moves you into conflict. So that this is an amazing, very simple, very fast engagement rather than a polarization. And we think that's the human problem. Polarization is the human problem. Engagement is a human solution. But we need a technology to make that happen, and Safe Conversation does it.
Well, I remember at the very first workshop I attended, a woman got up and she was crying, and she said that she'd been married for a certain number of years, and it was the first time she felt like she was ever listened to. Yeah. And this happens a lot at your workshops, doesn't it, Helen?
Right. I remember one woman on the evaluation forum said her favorite thing in the workshop was her husband had never looked at her in the eyes before. Mm-hmm. Because we have them stop and gaze at each other's eyes before they talk.
Mm-hmm. And I love it that you use humor and laughter, and it's not a 5 hours of crying.
He is a goofball. He is an absolute goofball. People think, we're going to deal with our relationship, but he gets people laughing in the first couple minutes, and everyone begins to relax because he's funny.
Well, I know one of the pledges that you ask couples to make is the positivity challenge. Am I describing it right?
Well, there are actually two.
Okay.
One is the zero negativity challenge.
Yes.
Which is that you remove put-downs from all your interactions. And then the second challenge is you replace them with positive engagement, so that there's a connecting language instead of a rupturing language. And we found that if couples will do that, if employees and employers will do that, if children will do it and parents will do it with their children, that what happens is you remove the worst thing that the brain feels, which is negativity. When people go negative, the brain goes on defense. It doesn't matter whether it's toward me or toward you. If I'm in the room, negative energy triggers the brain's defenses. So you don't want that, because then you can only defend yourself. What you want is a sense of safety, so that you can then drop your defenses and move into connecting and move into vulnerability.
And I love it, Helen, that you guys also involve the children, because sometimes the children can keep the parents accountable after the workshop is over. Let's talk about that.
Yes, the science is so teachable now. It's for the first time in the history of the world, as I said, you could teach adults to shift, but you can teach kids, and they love doing it. And we had our son, Hunter, correct us one day when we were getting a little frustrated with each other. He was in the back seat. He was 9 years old, and we were driving, and he leaned forward and said, "Mirror each other." And we tried to coach us. And we went, "Oh, yeah, that's right." The phrase, we use zero negativity, we do suggest people use that. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. And you can talk about any issue, anything you're frustrated about, mad about, and if you say it in a way that doesn't put the other person down, the person might listen and solve the problem with you.
That's so important. I know when I first met Victoria, I told her she can say anything she wants to me as long as she says it sweetly.
Right.
And so
Right.
she'll say, honey, your underwear go in the hamper, not next to the hamper. I know exactly what she's saying, but I can I can hear it
You can
better
hear it.
when,
Yeah.
when she says it sweetly.
And you're right about that. There is also scientific measurements about what happens to hearing. Is if it's a negative communication, you literally can't hear her, in the sense of taking it in. You hear it like a sound, but your brain goes on defense. She's now a dangerous person to the brain. I mean, consciously you don't say that, but the brain says negativity means this person could do bad things to me, and I could get hurt, be killed, maybe disappear from the universe. So not being negative or being engaging and positive and affirming is not an option for great relationships. It's a necessity.
Yes.
And I think the other thing to say about listening, Helen has a phrase that she often uses in the workshop, that our culture teaches us to talk. In fact, you have courses in speaking. There are no evidences of any courses we know of in listening. There's kind of an assumption that people listen. But listening, the research on listening is that your brain, in a restful condition like right now, receives only 20% of the information coming in. When you're not disturbed, when you are disturbed, it receives nothing. It just knows, I've got to protect myself. So that's why we built into the Safe Conversations process, did I get you? Because probably I got 20% of it. But in this context of expectation, you actually get more. But you also have somebody to say to you, well, you got 20% of it, and I also said, and I would like that measured too. And you don't do it as a contest. You want to fill up your head with what was said, because when you respond to a partially understood transaction, you will always then disturb the person because that's not what they said. But you made it up. What data you didn't get, you make up. So listening is the best skill anybody can develop. But you have to not just mouth it back. You have to. But somebody says you're listening when what your partner says to you or anyone else changes you.
Yes.
And you're not listening if it doesn't change you.
Well, Helen, it seems like each generation is becoming a little more selfish, if I can make that generalization. I mean, these days, the young people are into the selfies. It is a self-centered world, and it seems to be getting worse. And your movement, your revolution, is really saying, no, it's not about the self. It's about the space between two people, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, the space between two people. I think David Brooks, a New York Times editorial writer, talks about people love their iPhones, but they're lonely. That there's a real epidemic of loneliness and broken relationship and pain that people stuff inside. And what Harville and I talk about is a healthy relationship. It's not about one partner or the other, one person at work or the other person at work, but it's how two of them care for the space between. It looks invisible, like there's nothing here, but it's an energy field. That's why, as Harville said, the look in the eye and the tone of the voice,
yes,
and the words you choose can transform the space between.
Okay, well, I'm going to put you guys on the spot because here it is. You've literally written the books on this. When you have a disagreement, and Harville drifts into, is this a good time to? do you ever find yourself saying, no, I don't want to do it that way? I mean,
absolutely not.
No, you play by the rules.
Well, what if you're asking, is it now a good time?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you do set the time for the appointment.
Okay.
So we also can say, no, it's not a good time.
It is. It's somewhat rule-oriented, but so is learning to ski.
Yes. Yes.
There are rules, and people go, well, I want to be spontaneous. Like, it's a relationship. I can't be authentic unless I'm spontaneous. But There's a beautiful experience on the double black diamond of just the wonder of life and the universe and feeling great in nature. But the snowplow, you have to spend a little tiny bit on a snowplow. So so, you know, we train other people to do this. You can learn to do it. There's a book. Anyway,
yes,
it's a new science, and there are rules.
And I'm glad to hear that you're disciplined in that, because you know, we all know psychologists and psychiatrists who have gotten divorced, and they knew all the rules.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and we almost got divorced because we weren't living by the rules that we created for others. But what we discovered is that the rules actually work. And I think the thing to say about relationship is that it's a skill, but everybody assumes it's organically natural. Simply not true. Not in the culture, and not the way children are parented, and not the kind of civilization we've created. Being competent in a relationship requires learning and practicing a skill. That makes it very unromantic, but it makes romance possible.
Yes.
Because with the skill, you create safety so that you can actually be vulnerable, and that's when the romance happens.
Well, and Helen, you're famous for saying that we have a system for getting a driver's license, but there's really no test to get married, is there?
No, you have to read a manual and pass a test, and to get your driver's license. And if you don't pass the test, you have to read the manual again. And until you pass the test, you don't get your license. And again, it is so teachable. There's the import of fun, for example. Like,
Right.
There's something like, how much fun are you having? Can one of you bring fun into your relationship 3 or 4 times a week? And you structure it in. Harville and I were what I called fun impaired. We were both strategic thinkers. We are critical in the right sense of the word. But we didn't know how to have fun. Our kids, we had the worst marriage. Our kids couldn't stand to be around us. So we got Groucho Marx glasses and joke books. And we started bringing fun. The kids were laughing. We got hooked on the jokes. And we started bringing laughter and fun. Again, we were intentional about it. You should see Harville in Groucho Marx glasses. He's really cute.
Had I known this, I would have asked you both to bring them.
Right.
Maybe another time.
Well, so we're almost out of time for this show. So give us a way for people to get plugged in. How can they get involved?
Well, for Safe Conversations, they need to go to safeconversations.org and click on they'll be guided then about how to get a response. If they want to hear from Helen and me personally, we have a separate website called harvillandhelen.com, and that gives a schedule of things that we do outside of Relationships First, which is basically working with couples in retreat centers across the country.
This is relational education. Some of your listeners might be struggling and they need a therapist, and the Safe Conversation office would have the list of therapists. Because I feel relationship is holy, and let's first take care of relationships. There's a technology, there's a science to it, and if people knew it, they would know what to do. It's just it hasn't gotten out into the public yet, and that's what we're trying to do. And
relationshipsfirst.org also works. There's your website. You two are amazing, and thank you for this gift that you're giving the world.
Well,
this has been a
thank you
wonderful
for having
show.
us on.
I hope
you're an amazing interviewer.
I hope you'll come back again.
Honor to be here.
Love to.
All right, and we'll see you next time.